Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today, we're going to touch on some interesting kinds of things. We're going to look at some sensitive issues.
Yes, we just want to give our listeners a trigger warning here. We're looking at racism, slavery, and segregation. While we owe it to history to report the facts, we want to make it very clear that no one involved in the creation or editing of this podcast supports discrimination or racism in any way.
Well, 100 years before Rosa Parks' well-known resistance to segregation, Elizabeth Jennings Graham made her stand in 1854. This happened in the middle of New York City, not the segregated South. This was before there was many forms of transportation, like, say, automobiles and public transport, other than streetcars. Now, what happened here? Elizabeth here, Ms. Graham, was running late for her church where she was the organist. She was going to be playing, and so she just said, well, I can make it if I ride the streetcar. So she gets on the streetcar, and wow, what a scene. The conductor was okay with it, but the driver was like, hey, you got to get off of this streetcar. We don't have slaves on this streetcar, so get off.
You have that backwards, actually. It was the conductor that had a problem with her. The driver and even the other passengers were very acceptant of her, or at least tolerant of her riding the streetcar. It was the conductor, I guess, the guy that punches the tickets and things like that. He was the one that took issue with her being on the streetcar.
And he went so far as to get the police to forcibly remove her from the bus, severely tearing her Sunday best dress. She was extremely distressed and spoke with her father, and a week later, they decided to file a lawsuit. Now, her father was a very prominent figure, the first African-American to hold a patent in the state of New York. It was for an early version of the washing machine.
Washing machine, really? That's pretty cool.
Particularly for the 1840s. I should also mention that he was a former slave. Slavery was abolished in New York in 1830, who was purchased by her mother and then freed.
Wait. Let me get that straight again. Say that again. He was a slave who was bought by his future wife. And what?
Yes.
Why'd that happen?
Some people of African descent bought and purchased relatives and friends in order to give them their freedom or marry them or do other positive things they couldn't have done without getting them out of their original slavery situation.
Well, I mean, from a contemporary and perhaps even psychological perspective, how do you think that her father, being not only a former slave, but also a prominent inventor, I mean, he held a patent in New York for something that was actually kind of cool, especially for back then. How do you think that informed on Elizabeth's character growing up? Do you think that affected her in some way? I mean, her father was an inventor and a former slave, and her mother, it seems, in some way was working on some level of activism in her own small way.
Absolutely. I think it would have encouraged her to see herself as an equal to any person and to stand up for her rights. Now, we also wish to mention, friends, that we certainly do not condone slavery in any form, and these people of African descent were buying relatives or future spouses to secure their freedom.
Yes, Chester Arthur was the attorney that handled this case. Now, at the time, we know who Chester Arthur was, right? Okay, he was a future president. He wasn't at this time. He was a 25-year-old junior partner at a patent firm that Jennings has used in the past to file his patent. So Arthur championed the case before the judge in a bench trial, i.e., no jury was there. And I think that was on purpose for several reasons. I think Arthur didn't want there to be any influence from possibly segregationist or anti-Black people. So what he said, and this is direct from the transcript, he said, "Your Honor, I am Chester Arthur, representing Ms. Jennings. This is a clear situation of a citizen being denied the fundamental rights of citizenship. Ms. Jennings is guaranteed the right to freedom of religion, access to transportation, and to not be assaulted when she attempts to follow the dictates of her beliefs. To deny basic rights to a citizen is an affront to the very basis of a free and independent nation. How long will we force citizens based solely on their heritage to suffer indignity and harm to self and personal property? This wrongdoing must be stopped. We ask for punitive damages and reparation of her right to access public transportation." Now the judge, he says, "After hearing the prosecution and the defense, the court finds in favor of Mrs. Jennings. She is hereby rewarded $22.50 in legal costs and $250 in compensatory damages. I furthermore instruct the streetcar company to permit all sober, well-mannered, and disease-free people, regardless of race, equal access to transportation."
$250 is the equivalent of approximately $12,000 in 2022.
Elizabeth did not want to be a leader, but having had greatness thrust upon her, she felt that she owed it to posterity to do the best she could in that regard. She went on to champion women's suffrage, ultimately succeeding in winning local voting rights in the state of New York. She married Charles Graham, a musician and a former slave. Just like her mother, she had to buy her future husband and own him for 5 years before she could emancipate and marry him. I just want to say what an atrocity it is to have to own a human being in order to have the most intimate and personal relationship possible. Miss Graham also became a writer for the New York Tribune, covering political and international events similar to an international correspondent today.
Elizabeth also had a lot of really forward-thinking ideas about segregation, in that she identified one of the big problems was in the field of education, specifically young children. And she actually had sort of prototyped an idea for teaching young children basic life skills and inclusivity. In order to sort of research this, she actually went to Prussia. She spent her life savings, her earnings from the newspaper, as well as an inheritance from her father, and met with a whole lot of high-ranking officials from Prussia, including the High Elector himself. So she was actually fluent enough in English and German enough to speak with the leader of a foreign country in his own tongue. And that's pretty impressive.
She came back to New York and created the first kindergarten program east of the Mississippi, which was not segregated either by gender or race. And this was a definitive precursor to modern kindergartens, as well as providing a blueprint for the integration of American schools over 100 years later. This is an unsung heroine, a pioneer in so many fields.
And yes, actually, this was the first kindergarten established that was following this non-segregated kind of thing east of the Mississippi. I mean, there was another one out in California, but this was the first of its kind. She did a lot of work in the field, and we know that. I would encourage you to look into the life of Elizabeth Jennings Graham on your own. We can't possibly cover everything that we should or could in this, and with the complexity and brilliance of this pioneer, both in civil rights, and education. So I thank you for listening, and I hope that you will, right now, while you're thinking about it, click like and subscribe. And if you have any comments, we would surely like to hear them.
A great many other wonderful topics are coming up. We're finishing our longest podcast to date on Woodstock, and that's the first of many other things we're going to be working on, including a real-life Oscar de Grouch, the Greek philosopher Diogenes.
We also have an end-of-the-year wrap-up or a retrospective, if you will, coming up, which hopefully we'll have up by the 1st. Fingers crossed, everybody. But again, go ahead, click like, subscribe. Don't forget to turn on your notifications so you don't miss any episodes. And I guess we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye for now.